Welcome all to installment 3 of the Unheralded Views, the Run Around series. On this installment, we will highlight and appreciate a couple of local college basketball teams across the DMV, focusing on their overall seasons, conference tournament performances, and NCAA tournament hopes. Georgetown and Maryland will be the two main teams that will be analyzed today. So join me as we get into installment 3 of the Run Around series. The Georgetown Hoyas are your Big East tournament champions, huh? Didn't think we'd be saying that by the way this year started, especially with the fact that Georgetown, they finished 8th in the Big East with a 13-12 record. That's with them winning 4 in a row to end out the season, obviously all of them coming in the conference tournament. And they had a losing record in the conference at just 7-9 overall, so it's kind of crazy the fact that now we're sitting here talking about Georgetown gaining an automatic bid into the NCAA tournament with their win this past Saturday. But, as we said, crazy things happen seemingly all the time when the NCAAs are starting to roll around, the conference tournaments get through, and this happened a lot more than you usually would think. But just think about this, though. Georgetown had 4 games postponed and or canceled, and had over 2 weeks of games in total, adding all of them together, postponed because of COVID issues. Just think about the perseverance and the leadership Patrick Ewing had to display to his, again, very young basketball team to try to get them through this tough patch and basically a time where they didn't even have any chance to have any type of basketball activity whatsoever. That's incredible. And you look at it, they actually had some pretty impressive wins during the season as well, including over Creighton when they were ranked in the top 25, 86-79. And an 81-75 win over Seton Hall in the regular season as well. Both teams they beat in the regular season and would go on to beat in the conference tournament to ultimately become Big East champion. And when you look at some of the key statistics for this Georgetown team, you have their leading scorer, which was Javon Blair at 15.8 points per game, one of their really star guards of the team, lefty. And then you have obviously Qudus Wahab, who was a huge revelation, I think a big developmental piece that really has helped push Georgetown, I think, above the ceiling that a lot of people have for them, which was really, as many prognosticators said, bottom and pretty much dead last in the Big East. He led them in rebounding with 8 per game and also shot blocking 1.6 per game, spearheading a tremendous Georgetown defense that seemingly only got better and even more dominant when the tournament rolled around. And in terms of their overall team success statistically, they had 4 different players average double figures, including Blair and Wahab. You had Jamarco Pickett and Chudier Belay. So that's 4 players give you a double-figure score. That's a pretty good balance, along with having 6 players averaging 7 or more points, adding in freshman point guard Dante Harris and senior Donald Carey. So when you're getting that type of production from basically more than just your starting lineup, you're having basically 6 different players give you some type of significant production on the floor. That's going to speak well to the fact that it's not just a star player and then a bunch of role guys. It's really an all-for-one and one-for-all approach that Georgetown has taken on, and they've really grown together as this young team to become, I think, what could be a very scary matchup for the team that they're about to play in this upcoming tournament this weekend. Now, I think the best thing to do then to transition is let's talk about that tournament run, shall we, to become the Big East tournament champion. It all started with a, I think, shockingly dominant win over Marquette, and they were able to go in and beat Marquette 68-49 to kick off the tournament. So we'll talk about kicking the door down of the Big East tournament to begin. They then obviously had their win of the tournament and really of the season with a 72-71 win over the Villanova Wildcats. In a game, by the way, they hit 23 of 23 free throws did Georgetown, which shows you once again, when you hit free throws, especially when you're playing big games against very good competition and against a team that a lot of people would probably consider better than you to that point, when you do the little things, it's going to go a long way to helping your success. They then followed that up with a 66-58 win, giving themselves, obviously, their second win over Seton Hall, as I talked about earlier, with their win against them in the regular season. And then they wrapped it all up this past Saturday with a dominant 73-48 win over Creighton to win the Big East tournament and ultimately gain their automatic bid into the NCAA tournament. And truly, that was, I think, a really big-time moment for Patrick Ewing and the Georgetown program to try to really put themselves back on the map after a couple of years where they were kind of toiling near the bottom of the Big East standings. Now, who won the most outstanding player award for the Big East tournament? It actually turned out to be freshman point guard Dante Harris. For the year, Harris averaged 8 points, 3.4 rebounds, 3.2 assists, 1.1 steals, and also led the team with an 89.7% percentage from the free throw line. So definitely led the way for a Georgetown team that overall as a whole shot the ball pretty well from the free throw line compared to what we've seen the last couple of seasons from this group. And if we really want to look and delve even deeper into the season, there's at least 4 key developments that I really want to go over when it comes to talking about Georgetown basketball that I think could go a long way for their future, as well as maybe them having a long shelf life within the tournament. I narrowed down these main season developments really to 4 key things. And the first thing I want to touch on is really how the defense that they play became the linchpin of their success, especially in their conference tournament. It will be going into the NCAA tournament this season. The fact that they played phenomenal man-to-man defense and were excellent when it came to protecting the rim, leading the Big East tournament in block shots by a pretty significant margin, just tells you how much effort and how much Patrick Ewing has really coached up this team to really value and I think enjoy playing defense and keeping the other team at bay offensively. The second main season development I really saw is that this is one of the better free throw shooting Georgetown teams I've seen in a while, with 5 of their 7 main rotational players at 77% or better from the free throw line. And as we know, in a tournament where there's going to be likely some tight games to be played, where you have a bunch of guys, especially more than just 1 or 2 guys, but you have 5 different guys you can trust to step to the free throw line and make them, especially down the stretch of the game. That's going to be paid off in the long run for Georgetown having a long shelf life in the tournament. Third, you have the growth of some of their young players like sophomore center Qudus Wahab and freshman point guard Dante Harris, and the fact that Patrick Ewing has got these young players to take such big leaps to become leaders of this young basketball team overall, I think really speaks to Patrick Ewing's growth as a coach, which ties perfectly into the main thing I have bolded in this main season developments, which is Patrick Ewing's growth as a coach. I think the camaraderie he's been able to build with his team that we maybe just didn't see overall the last couple of seasons, as he really, I think, has grown more and more comfortable in the college ranks at the coaching level. I think now you're starting to see Patrick Ewing really put his imprint and put his identity on this basketball team. They're tough. They defend very, very well, as he did as a player. And also, they're efficient offensively and try to make sure they take care of the basketball. All things I think Patrick Ewing valued as a player and now is clearly valued as a coach as he teaches this young group how to win at the college level as much as he did, which is one of the most winning players in Georgetown basketball history. Now, just so we're all clear, Georgetown is officially a 12th seed in this NCAA tournament, and they're going to face 5th seeded Colorado this Saturday, March 20th at 12:15 p.m. So make sure you all definitely tune in and try to support our local team, the Georgetown Hoyas. But now, to wrap things up about the tournament talk, let's really discuss things about how Georgetown specifically can make noise in the tournament and which players need to step up in order for that to happen. Now, the main player I've kind of bolded in my notes that I said needs to step up has to be senior guard Jamarco Pickett, who I definitely see as the most dynamic player Georgetown has of all their wing players. He averages 12.3 points per game, which was pretty good. One of the 4 players they had averaging double figures this season. But I think he can even choose to be more aggressive, because I think this is definitely a guy that if he really wants to go out there and get himself 20-plus points, he can, because I think he truly has the talent to do it. And the fact that he's been able to give them pretty good offensive production while taking on some of the tougher defensive matchups for Patrick Ewing really speaks to his ability as a two-way player, using his size and length on both ends of the court. So I think if they can get an elevated play from one of their senior leaders, that could go a long way to helping Georgetown have a extended stay in the NCAA tournament. The other main player I want to highlight as a guy that needs to step up is freshman guard Dante Harris. Now, I think definitely he has continued to develop, I think, into a really nice young player for Patrick Ewing to build his program around going forward. But if he can continue to run the point guard spot as efficiently as he had thus far to this point, limit his turnovers, continue to feed the post, and get guys like Wahab the basketball down low so they can do what they do best, and that's create a paint presence inside, as well as continue to hit the timely shots he's been able to and did throughout the Big East tournament, and make his free throws at the high clip he's done pretty much all year. He's going to, I think, give them the stability at the point guard position they haven't had the last couple of seasons. As we know, the better the guard play is in the tournament, the better chance you ultimately have to go deep into the tournament overall. Now, in terms of a couple of the X-Factor players I want to highlight, these are grad transfer Chidier Belay and senior guard Donald Carey. These are 2 players that I think, in Belay's case, if he continue to produce double-figure scoring while shooting the ball as well from the perimeter as he has, especially during the tournament, and then if Carey can provide the outside shooting consistently that I think Georgetown needs to spread out the floor and give a guy like Wahab, who is a very good offensive player in the middle of the floor, to work down low in the post and give him a little more room, I think that's going to go a long way to making Georgetown's offense that much more efficient, especially because they were kind of middling in terms of their offensive production as the season went along. And kind of the last main thing, and really the one main question I have for Georgetown overall, is what can their bench truly give them? I feel like the teams we usually see go deep into the tournament have one of 2 things. Either they have very good seniors, either at the big man or the guard position that they can go to get a big bucket down the stretch, or you have teams that are just very deep and can go about 7, 8, 9 deep on a consistent basis and wear other teams out because other teams as the tournament goes along just may not be as deep as them and as talented as them. So for Georgetown, my main question for them, especially as a team, is can they get enough bench production to make sure they don't have to wear out their top guys so they can have a longer shelf life of the tournament that I see they could ultimately have. And that's going to take me right into my whole prediction of how long do I see Georgetown lasting in the tournament. For me personally, I predict Georgetown's actually going to win their first round game against Colorado. I think because they're playing so well, especially on the defensive end of the floor, and we're seeing some of their young players like Wahab and Harris only get better and better as each game goes along, and now facing off against some very tough competition, rising up to the challenge. I think they definitely have what it takes to beat a team like Colorado, who again is very talented and going to be a very tough task. Don't get me wrong, I'm not overlooking Colorado. I just think Georgetown's got the momentum on their side. But in order for them to maybe get a second win in the tournament, which I think would be a huge success with everything they've done with it, where the program's at as a whole for Georgetown, I think it's going to come down to, again, what I mentioned earlier, their biggest question is, do they have enough depth and do they have enough balance overall in their scoring to be able to have a long shelf life in this tournament? And they're also going to need to continue, obviously, to play the strong defense that I think is going to be big and keep it in them in this upcoming game this Saturday as well as going forward. But that's pretty much all I got to say on Georgetown, and hopefully we're going to get a good game and a Georgetown win this coming Saturday. So let's get into our second main team to talk about today, and that is the Maryland Terrapins and their tournament. So for our Maryland Terrapins, they finished ninth in the Big Ten Conference, which I think definitely proved itself to be the best conference in college basketball this past year, as by the fact that they got 2 number 1 seeds in the NCAA tournament coming up to start this Thursday. But to talk specifically about Maryland, they finished their season with a 16-13 record and a 9-11 conference record overall. So similar to Georgetown, they were actually 2 games under 500 in their conference, although a much tougher conference in the Big Ten. They also had their own bout with COVID issues. They had 1 game postponed and 2 actually canceled due to COVID, so it was kind of a especially choppy start and middle of the season for Georgetown overall. But they were still able to get quite a few games in, and it got quite a few notable wins, to be honest with you. It began with a 70-64 win over Wisconsin, who was ranked at the time. They got a win over number 1 ranked Illinois, 66-63, as well as a 61-60 win on the road over Purdue, and they even beat Michigan State, who since they've joined the Big Ten has kind of been their nemesis, beating them 3 different times. So you talk about getting a wide range of different victories. I mean, you can see why Georgetown, despite maybe a somewhat subpar record and not winning their conference tournament, managed to punch themselves a ticket to the big dance. Now, when you look at some of the key statistics, mainly their leading scorer was junior guard Eric Ayala, who led them at 14.9 points per game. Their leading rebounder and shot blocker being sophomore forward Dante Scott with 6.1 rebounds and 0.8 blocks per game. They didn't necessarily have great distribution overall in terms of points as far as double figures go, with only 3 players averaging double figures scored in Ayala and Scott, who I previously mentioned, and then junior guard Aaron Wiggins, who I'm going to mention a little bit later, is going to be a big part of how long the shelf life for Maryland is in this upcoming tournament. But they did have 6 different players average nearly 7 points per game, adding guys like the veteran and senior Morcell, youngsters like Hart and Hamilton as well for this Maryland group, giving them some balance scoring overall, even though maybe not a whole bunch of guys averaging double figures. Now, unlike Georgetown, their tournament run was a little more short-lived. They started by getting what was their eventual 3rd win over Michigan State on the year by beating them in the tournament 68-57, but then ultimately fell to Michigan, who again has been 1 or 2 in the tops of the country for a while now. They gave them a pretty nice run in the regular season meeting before ultimately going down, and the same can be said here for this tournament game where they ultimately end up losing 79-66. But with all that being said, where does that lead them in terms of some of the main developments I saw for this team this year? Well, some of them were good, and some of them, though, I think still leaves a lot of questions and a lot to be desired from this Maryland team. And to begin with some of the good, I think the fact that defense clearly showed to be their strong suit and giving them and their best chance at winning games. I think, once again, just like Georgetown, they can guard at a pretty high level because they got the athletes and they have the length on the outside to really bother shooters, as well as they have, I think, just enough size down low to be able to hang with some of the bigger teams, as well as utilizing their quickness and quick hands to get a lot of deflections. But again, the fact is, unlike Georgetown, they've been very inconsistent with how they've competed on the defensive end, and they're going to need to be, I think, consistently great throughout this tournament in order to give themselves a very good chance, especially because when you look at some of the more downsides of what we saw from their season is just, again, the continued up and down offensive output that we've seen Mark Turgeon teams have. They also lacked really a true consistent third scorer, and their bench production was rather pedestrian at best, to be nice about it. But one thing I did take, though, on the other end of the spectrum, the positive end, was that they showed a lot of grit by going on the road and beating a lot of these teams in the Big Ten, like the Wisconsin, the Purdue's, and the Illinois of the world. I mean, those are some impressive wins against some of the best teams in the country that, who knows, they may see down the road in the tournament. We'll just have to wait and see on that, of course. But this kind of leads into really my fifth and final thing in terms of the main season developments, and that is coaching possibly a problem for Maryland? Now, I'm not trying to criticize Mark Turgeon overtly because I think he is a good college basketball coach. But it seems like one of the main things Maryland tends to have in terms of a problem is they don't really seem to adjust very well. They get off to hot starts or they come out slow and try to pick it up as the game goes along. But it seems like, especially when they come out at halftime, it just seems like they're either not being able to execute these adjustments or adjustments just aren't being made and they're just kind of going through the same motions that got them into some of the ruts that they dig themselves into. So I'm interested to see how the whole idea of making adjustments is going to go when we get into their first NCAA tournament game, which will be also this Saturday, March 20th at 7:10 p.m. versus the 7th-seeded UConn Huskies, as they are a 10th seed in this NCAA tournament. But now, I think that leads perfectly into, if the Terps are going to have an extended run in the tournament, what players must step up and what things have to happen in order for the Terps to have an extended shelf life. And the main player I really want to highlight in terms of their starting lineup and overall is Aaron Wiggins. And I think Aaron Wiggins, just like Jamarco Pickett, as I mentioned earlier for Georgetown, he must elevate his game, become, I think, the go-to scorer he has every ability to be. Is also, he's got to shoot more consistently from the perimeter. He's got a beautiful looking three-point shot. Just has to be able to make it on a more consistent basis to make teams, I think, respect it even more than they already do. And also stretch the floor more for a Maryland offense that could definitely use more consistent shooting from the outside. Because as we've seen this year in several of their games, and even saw it last year, when they have a tough time making threes, they don't seem to have a great second option to go to. So if they can make threes as this tournament goes along, I think they're going to obviously have a great chance. He's also, though, got to be able to demand the ball more and then make some of the key plays to get the offense going. I think really be a main catalyst. Don't always leave it to a guy like Ayala to initiate the offense. I think if Mark Turgeon gets a little more creative, putting the ball in Wiggins' hands, especially at the start of possessions, running him off of pick and rolls, getting him off of some down screens, things of that nature, that could go a long way to getting him going early and getting him going very often, because I think he could be a dynamic scorer for Maryland as this tournament goes along. The other main player I think needs to step up has to be youngster Hakeem Hart. And I think I'm talking about him because he's one of the guys I really could see providing the extra support from the perimeter in terms of three-point shooting, as well as the secondary scoring. I think Maryland's going to need to be able to have a long leash and a long shelf life in this tournament. And when you look at his numbers overall, he did shoot 44% from the floor, which was one of the better shooting percentages on the team, and averaged just under 7 points at 6.8 per game. So again, this is a young player that I think shows some confidence, and as he got continued to more and more playing time, began to show a lot more confidence in his offensive game overall, and hopefully that carry over into a strong first NCAA tournament for the young man. And I think could go a long way to him being a real key X factor to provide Maryland the depth scoring they're going to need to be able to beat a very good UConn team and whatever teams they may face down the road. And then the other main thing has to do again with Coach Mark Turgeon. I think he's just got to be more willing to play his bench. I think there's some very talented young players that he does have on his bench, but seems almost apprehensive at times to play them, which I think kind of stunted their development and the development of their bench as their season went along. As we said, it's tough for teams that only go about 6-7 deep to be able to last in the tournament for very long because, again, you wear out your players, even though, again, these are very young men, but still, you wear out your players over the course of a game, which is going to lead to lows offensively and defensively. So I think he has to feel comfortable or at least has to develop some type of ability to play more of his bench, to give some of his guys that really steal minutes for some of his key players in order to keep them fresh so they can ultimately go on and win some tight games and be fresh in the late game situation like they're going to need to be. And I think that allows me to perfectly wrap everything up by talking about what could be the Maryland Terrapins tournament shelf life. For Maryland, I could actually see them winning 2 tournament games right off the bat, especially if their defense remains as sound as it has looked this year, especially in a lot of their victories over teams like Wisconsin and Illinois, where I think they defended at an extremely high level. It was really the main reason they won those games. They also, though, are going to need to shoot far more adequately from 3 especially, because, again, if they're not able to make outside shots, where we've seen that this is an offense that can really teeter and not have a whole lot of backup plans when it comes to trying to create easy baskets for themselves. So they have to be able, I think, to hit threes early to get the confidence going and hit them just often enough to keep themselves engaged on the defensive end of the floor. Now, certainly one thing I will say is that this is not nearly as talented of a team as last year because, again, losing guys like Jalen Smith to the NBA and Anthony Cowan to get graduation are a big deal. But the fact that you still have some carryovers from last season, like Eric Ayala, Aaron Wiggins, who are also with the team that won a couple games of the tournament the year before last. I mean, they've got enough experience, I think, on the team with some of these young players gaining key experience from the Big Ten tournament that they could make a run this year. And I think they could, with their grit and grind personality that they have, they could really find a way, I think, to become one of the more underrated teams and make that under the radar run that no one may see coming in this year's NCAA tournament overall. And that's all pretty much I got to say on the Maryland Terrapins. Well, I hope you all are as excited as me for the NCAA tournament this year. I implore you to support the local teams like Georgetown and Maryland, but also don't forget about the VCUs and the Virginias of the world, as the DMV is solidly represented in the tournament this year. It should be intriguing, especially to see how far our local DMV colleges can go. So thank you all for listening, and remember, leave comments and suggestions in the comments of the connected post, or tweet directly at me at MC182B with ideas for topics for the next installment. Everyone have a fantastic day and stay locked in for the next installment of The Runaround.